First of all, we have to build, not to destroy.
What are the values that we'd want to take outside beyond, as you said, an import-export model, essentially, of Europe? And can we identify with them, and can we share them?
Europe has a long-standing tradition of innovation and creativity in a lot of different areas.
I think collaboration is key to actually being successful.
Cultural entrepreneurs and managers, creative minds, economists, politicians and journalists in a conversation about current practices and models that foster international cultural relations and envision future pathways for the EU's external relations.
We have a commitment to cultural diversity which goes with our political experience and political message, and we should be consequent with it, and so become partners of the development of other cultural and creative industries throughout the world. And I think it also makes sense economically, because you do not export culture like you export cars. You just create spaces where cultures can have encounters.
That if we believe that Europe has a role to play in the political domain, in the domain of sustainability, in the domain of climate control and all these things, then it would be downright crazy not to ignore the cultural dimension as part of that larger whole. Certainly there is an enormous creative legacy in Europe, a legacy of ages, which is being expanded all the time as we speak. And that creative legacy that shows up in the performing arts, but also, of course, in the museums across the continent, in its theaters and operas, in its architecture, in its landscapes, in its cultured landscapes especially. And what I would hope is for more of a joint effort at the European level, non-bureaucratic but supportive of wherever we cross national cultural boundaries. That is where Europe can make a positive difference, add something valuable to what already is a very valuable presentation.
We have basically 27, maybe 28, 29 very strong culture in Europe. There is no debate actually between, do you need a cultural policy, do you need cultural diplomacy or not? We do need it, but there is different ways of doing it. And whatever you can say, cultural diversity and national identity are not the same. We have 10 or 15% of our population who is now Muslim, or at least from Arabic background. What we do for them in the cultural field? Nothing. There is not even one theater for the Arabs in France. Helping these people to become maybe more French, but also more European, and to have their culture, they will be able also to speak with other people in Europe. And step by step, it's maybe a way also to build Europe if we believe in our real diversity and not just on concept in a national institution.
The mindset of Europe can combine well with the influence of other cultures now coming into Europe and settling. So the diversity can be even more diverse. Even though Europe may have invented the art of cinema, it's not, and obviously Hollywood, but there are more players. It's no longer just about Europe versus the US and Hollywood. It's really about lots of other countries and continents who are coming up with extremely interesting artistic voices. I think in this respect, Europe cannot rest on its laurels of tradition, that we really have to step up. And to be very practical, we need to promote European culture and European works. So it's also a pure service that they could deliver in promoting this and giving opportunities for European filmmakers and other artists in other disciplines to showcase, and thereby maybe also forge ties, although I prefer them to be sort of organic, with colleagues in other countries. If we really want to be serious about the European project, we have to have, the building of the European project.
Those things don't happen unless you have networks that function. And to my mind, and they're also always about collaboration, and there are always things happening beyond that which are about business, and therefore in cultural terms, also about cultural relations, about trading and exchanging cultural goods and services. And I think, you know, if you can have those types of interventions, all of a sudden the nature of the international conversation, the way in which you are understood, is more positive because you're not imposing anything on somebody, you're actually creating an opportunity for them to thrive as well, and you're sharing experiences.
What we should be trying to do is talk more about contemporary Europe, actually what's happening in Europe, how Europe operates today, because it's that Europe that people are having to engage with in Saudi Arabia or in Indonesia or in China or wherever it may be in the world. It's that Europe that they need to understand better.
So are you saying, Andrew, rather hip-hop than Van Gogh?
I am, to be honest with you, and I think actually, you know, that would be the approach the British Council would take. What excites the politicians is that this agenda is about creating jobs and economic growth. That's what they see, that's what turns them on to the notion of the creative economy.
Culture is a tool to work in diplomacy. And there I think we made a lot of mistakes in the past. After 1989, we collectively did not pay enough attention to promote Western values, if you want. Culture also gives us, and this is very important also in diplomacy, especially when you're working in an environment where you don't speak the language or not very well, you can communicate, you have non-verbal communication through the arts. You have to make sure that you can travel as an artist, that they get a visa, that you can, that there's a distribution of movies, that there is no censorship, that the internet can be used. That's what we're discussing with the Chinese.
It is actually three things. One is the money side. The second is access to networks. And the third, I think, which is also very important, is simply actively promoting European culture, almost like a product which you promote internationally. And I think this should become much more a sort of European strategy because the scale the world is operating in now actually is the scale of Europe or the scale of North America, the scale of China and India. It's not so much the scale of the Netherlands or Portugal or Spain or whatever country we take in Europe.
It is a culture which is critical, which is resistant, which is oppositional, which is above all self-critical of the conditions of Europe itself, and that allows NGOs in Egypt, NGOs in Kosovo, NGOs in Palestine, NGOs in China, NGOs in Indonesia, to, in some sense, draw strength from the idea of being different, being oppositional, representing something which is not the mainstream. If you have an economic, you have a political, and you have a cultural pillar. Yeah? And societies, it seems to me, are healthy if those three are to some degree in balance. We are way out of balance now. The economic pillar is far too strong for the political pillar and for ideological argument, but also for the cultural pillar. We need to, and the crisis is part of that process, to bring these things back into some kind of balance. So what I'm interested in doing is talking to the group of people who want to ask the difficult questions. I want to talk to the group of people who want to say no to whatever the status quo is. The right to be a minority, the right to say things that are not popular, the right to be uneconomic, the right to be useless. Those are the values that we have to defend, and those are the values that I think can be European values that we can take to the rest of the world.
And don't believe that they all think, oh, this is very French, this is very British, this is very what? Far away. They think Europe is a sort of economic entity. Therefore, we have to become more political and we have to become more cultural, because I don't want to sell Europe as an import-export club.